Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm Renee Reyes, Executive in charge of production here at the Paley Center for Media. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you on this truly special night. We are thrilled that the esteemed members of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association continue their celebration of the 75th anniversary of the Golden Globe Awards by celebrating the groundbreaking Golden Globe-winning TV game changers we honor tonight. Each of them has made an indelible contribution to television and to our culture overall. And the Golden Globes and HFPA have been groundbreaking as well, the first organization to honor both film and television, and also amongst the first to bring attention to and acknowledge some incredible TV visionaries. Here at the Paley Center, it's particularly fitting that this celebration is being held here this evening because for over 4 decades, we've celebrated television's past, present, and future, hosting luminaries on our stages in New York and here in Los Angeles, including all of the visionary talents we're honoring on stage tonight. We've also preserved the incredible legacy of television in the Paley Archive, which is the largest publicly accessible educational media archive in the United States and now numbers some 200,000 programs. We are thrilled to announce this evening that the HFPA is donating copies of every broadcast of the Golden Globe Awards beginning in 1973 to the Paley Archive. Yeah, I think that deserves a round of applause. Where they will be preserved and made available to the public for decades to come. And now to kick off our celebration in earnest, please join me in welcoming the president of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, Meher Tatna.
See anything. Good evening and welcome to the Hollywood Foreign Press Association's Television Game Changers panel. We are very excited to have with us some of the industry's most influential storytellers: JJ Abrams, David E. Kelley, Norman Lear, Ryan Murphy, Shonda Rhimes, and Jill Soloway. I'm especially happy to welcome our panelists as we look forward to the 75th Golden Globe Awards on January 7th on NBC. Artists have the power to change the world, and our guests, all of whom are Golden Globe Award winners themselves, are doing exactly that by pushing the boundaries and redefining what content could and should be. We are extremely proud that the HFPA had a small role to play in singling out the innovative content each of them has contributed to the TV landscape. We did a count of all the Golden Globe nominations amassed amongst their shows for a grand total of 209 nominations, of which 48 are wins. During a time when the media landscape has changed drastically, and when television and streaming have made their mark as the most influential forms of media, our panelists have continued to create content that entertains, inspires, and celebrates the human condition, including Golden Globe-winning shows such as All in the Family, LA Law, Ally McBeal, The Practice, Lost, Nip Tuck, Glee, The People vs. O.J. Simpson American Crime Story, Grey's Anatomy, and Transparent. Before we bring our panelists on stage, I would like to thank the Paley Center for Media for hosting us and for their decision to include the Golden Globe Award shows in their archives. Also, a huge shout out to the HFPA members, my colleagues. They make the Golden Globes possible with their blood, sweat, and tears, and I'm only slightly exaggerating. Lastly, I would like to thank the panelists. The 75th anniversary of the Golden Globe Awards is a milestone the HFPA is very proud of, and we are honored to have them here to celebrate with us. Now, please help me welcome HFPA member and moderator of tonight's panel, Jenny Cooney.
I am proud to introduce some of the greatest storytellers in TV history. I won't leave you hanging any longer. Jill Soloway. You're here. Here. Shonda Rhimes. Wherever you want. You guys are in charge here. You sit wherever you want. Ryan Murphy. Norman Lear. David E. Kelley. And JJ Abrams. Okay. All right. So before we get started, we were thinking about doing a reel, and then we realised the whole hour and a half would be taken up just with all of your work. So we've just come up with a little something just to connect the Golden Globes and how proud we are of the awards that you've won from us. So let's take a look at a little clip.
Boy, the way Glenn Miller played
songs that made the hit parade. Gee, our old LaSalle ran great. Those were the days.
Gene Stapleton, All in the Family.
Thank you, Foreign Press Association. I feel the same gratitude to Norman Lear for casting me in the part.
Accepting for Ally McBeal as creator, executive producer, David E. Kelley.
Thank you to the Foreign Press in a time where all the market analysts were telling us that this show was maybe too different for its own good.
Accepting the Golden Globe, creator, executive producer, JJ Abrams, and the cast.
You support us, you let us do this show, and we could not feel more gratitude.
Erin! Hi. Hi. Hi.
Accepting the Golden Globe for Grey's Anatomy is creator, executive producer, Shonda Rhimes.
I'm staring at Jack Nicholson and Dustin Hoffman and Beatty. This is surreal. Thank you so much!
Accepting the Golden Globe for Glee will be creator and executive producer Ryan Murphy.
This show is about a lot of things. It's about the importance of arts education. And this is for anybody. Thank you. And this is for anybody and everybody who got a wedgie in high school. Thank you.
This award is dedicated to the memory of Leela Alcorn and too many trans people who die too young. And it's dedicated to you, my trans parent, my MAPA, and maybe we're going to be able to teach the world something about authenticity and truth and love. To love.
Okay. I'd like to start off with Norman, if the rest of you don't mind, because...
I'd like to complain about the clip.
Oh, what?
Clearly that was designed to show the audience it's been a long time since I won a Golden Globe. Everybody here looks the same in the clip. Even Norman aged well.
Even Norman aged well.
I'm sorry. We'll see what we can do next year, okay? I wanted to start off with Norman because I was doing some research and these figures were just amazing to me in this landscape that we're in now. So you were part of the first golden age of TV in the 70s, coming right out of the gate with All in the Family, and then a string of hits, Good Times, Maude, The Jeffersons, Mary Hartman, Sanford and Sons, and One Day at a Time, which is currently back in a reboot with Rita Moreno, who's here tonight. At one point, you had 7 shows in the top 10, and you counted 120 million people per week watching your content. And you pushed the boundaries of the era even back then and gave a primetime voice to a lot of underrepresented Americans. So I want to know, how difficult was that? You know, those shows were groundbreaking, even now, I would imagine, some of them. So how tough was it for you to get those shows on the air?
The fact of life, probably speaking for all of us, is you work your ass off doing this, and then the rest of the world tells you what you did. We were just working people, all of us. We worked hard. We did very well. It's very hard to, and we've all read the same stuff about all our work. I don't mean to, I'm not seeking to minimize it, but there's nothing I can say that hasn't been said about it all. Am I wrong?
But were there fights that you had with the networks about not wanting to air some of your shows?
One little anecdote says it all. On the very first episode of All in the Family, we told a very slight story so we could get 360 degrees of Archie in it. And that little plot line was, it was their 25th wedding anniversary. It was a Sunday. They were at church. Mike and Gloria were making a surprise brunch for them. They found themselves alone in the house, which was rare. Mike induces her to go upstairs with him. They go upstairs, close the bedroom door. No sooner do they do that, the front door opens. Archie and Edith walk in. He hated the sermon, didn't like the minister, and they left church early. They see balloons, they smell food cooking, they realize what's going on. And Mike and Gloria also heard the door, and they're rushing down the stairs. They're buttoning up. Archie has the first line, which was 11:30 on a Sunday morning. Line had to come out. Why did the line have to come out? Because it causes the audience to think about exactly what was going on up there. Well, but when a man says to a woman, let's go upstairs, and they come down buttoning, they know what. But Archie puts their minds to work on it. I mean, he focuses on it. Has to come out. I said if that, I don't want it to sound so brave. I had a 3-picture deal as a result of a film called Cold Turkey that I was saying no to in order to do All in the Family. So I was going to be all right. But I knew if I gave in to what I thought was silly, it would rule my, all the years or weeks or whatever of the show. And the insistence that line came out seemed silly to me. I said no. If you take that line out of the show in the East 3 hours earlier in the West, I won't be here tomorrow morning. And I was on my way home, or about to leave to go home to watch the show when I got a call that they left the line in. And that's how close that was over nothing.
Wow.
Thank you.
it seems even more important these days that TV's pushing the boundaries and tackling the issues of today. I wonder who wants to jump in about the fights that each of you have had about what you could get on the air, what stories you wanted to tell, without getting anyone in trouble.
Well, we don't have a lot of fights with the network at Amazon just because of the structure of streaming. But there was a moment, I think, in season 2 or 3 where we started talking about Josh having a relationship with a trans woman. And I think we got a little bit of feedback of like, well, is everybody on the show going to be gay? Or, is everybody on the show? And it doesn't make Josh gay to have a relationship with a trans woman. Trace Lizette played Shay, who's a woman, and happens to be a trans woman. And it took us a couple of seasons to be able to sell the storyline that Josh and Shay would have a love story. And that's too bad that it took us so long.
Ryan, what about Nip Tuck? Was that tough to get made? I know John Landgraf's in the audience here. We can thank him for that, but...
No, it wasn't actually. It was, that was never a difficult thing to get made because it was a new network at the time and I was willing to do it for scale, so it was sort of like, okay, let's try it. No, I mean, I look at my career and I think that I never changed. I mean, what changed in my life is the executives changed. I think when I first started out in 1998 in my first show, it was very difficult for me because every day I would go to work and they would basically tell me in a very passive-aggressive way, you're too gay, your writing is too gay, your characters are too gay, can you change the gay stuff? Can you make it different and just can you not be you? Basically is what they would say. And it was very painful for me and I sort of didn't know any other way to be. And I did that show for 2 years and then it was canceled. And the great thing that happened to me in my lifetime was by the time that I did Glee, I was still in that fight or flight mode that I thought I had to fight a lot, but I didn't. And after the first script, the executives, Dana and Gary and I think it was Peter, said, can we have more of the gay character? So I was shocked, but I mean, I felt very liberated and I felt that history and time had caught up to my career and what I was trying to do. And that has been the great change in my life. I don't really fight about things like that anymore. I don't fight about or even argue about it. It's sort of, I feel like generationally the group of people I work with are interested in the same things as I am. And that was a big change for me.
Shonda, what about for you?
I don't have battles so much with the executives or the people we're making shows with. Speaking in the past at ABC, it was more, and I have to admit that part of me enjoys the going into battle. But I have epic, I feel like, conversations with broadcast standards and practices that are amazing and sometimes ludicrous and sometimes make me more, make me feel stronger in my convictions about whatever it is that we're talking about, that are amazing to me, that people think that things can't go on television and think that, people will be shocked if they see something. You can shoot someone in the face at 8 o'clock and watch their brains spray out of the back of their head and no one will say a word. But if a woman puts her hand on another woman's upper thigh, people lose their minds. And it makes no sense to me. So, I like to argue about those things.
I bet you win a few too.
I win them all, I like to say. But they're wonderful over at Broadcast Standards and Practices. They're very good people. I want to make sure I say that.
Well, David, that clip about, not to rub in the clip again, but the clip where you were talking about Ally McBeal at the time, people in marketing saying that the show was too different for its own good. Had you had feedback like that before? I mean, where did that fit in terms of your fights with getting your stories told?
Well, on Ally, that was specific to that show. When we were debuting, Fox was a big fan of the pilot. They just didn't think anybody would like it. Peter Roth, I had a meeting with him, and he said, look, you've made a very nice little film here, but if we debut this in the clutter of pilot content, it's not going to get noticed. It's a little too much of this. It's not enough of that. It's not a hard drama. It's not laugh out loud funny. It's just this quiet little piece that's going to get lost. And if we put it on, it will be stillborn and get a very small rating, and then I can't keep it on. So what he was asking for is to hold it until mid-season, where it would have face less competition. And I might have been open to that, but we had just gone through a similar scenario on The Practice. And The Practice, we had a time slot on ABC, and it was yanked from us at the last minute, and I was still bitter over it. So I said to Peter, you know, I've been down that road. I want it. You promised you'd put it on the fall. Let's put it on the fall and just see where it, you know, if it can survive or not. And to his credit, he put it on, and it caught on. It, I guess, proves the adage that nobody really knows anything. But but specific to that clip, what I was talking about in that clip is we didn't launch out of the gates. We started to build in increments, but we got a Golden Globe nomination. And that gave us traction. I mean, people said, okay, the show has won, let's check this out. And it was shortly after we won that Golden Globe that the increments now started to jump up in bigger chunks. In terms of content, I was very, very blessed. Networks let me sort of spit the bit with ideas. We tackled a lot of difficult subject matter, and I credit Fox, and I also have to credit Stephen Bochco a lot because he was my mentor. And when I came in, he had just done Hill Street Blues, and we were now doing LA Law. And Hill Street Blues, he wrote, if you remember that show, which was brilliant, that was a game changer show with the multi-story format. And if every third episode, Ferrillo would turn in his badge, he would quit. You want my badge? You quit. Well, when I got to Fox, I was in an early story meeting, and a phone call came in, and Stephen was getting notes, and the other writers, they were hip to it, said, Ferrillo's going to throw his badge out, and Stephen did just that, basically. I quit. I quit. Then if you take that line out, similar to your story, I quit. Go find someone else. So I kind of thought that's what you do. you quit. So in year 3, Stephen said, here, I want you to take over the show. And I said, well, I quit. And we had battles with the networks over content, but the truth is he blazed such a trail, and he earned the trust of both the audience and the executives. And by executives, that was Brandon Tartikoff, who was a game changer himself. So I felt fairly free in terms of content when I took over that show, and because that show worked, I think I was afforded the same luxury in some of the ongoing shows. So.
Well, JJ, I mean, you had that little show Lost that sort of, you know, you had been doing movies before that, and then suddenly everybody heard about this pilot, and then we saw the pilot and thought, oh, how are they going to sustain that with the plane crash and all of that? What was that experience like for you coming into television and trying to figure out where it would fit into the landscape and do it the way you wanted to do it?
Well, I had co-created the show Felicity and then done the show Alias, and we were actually, I haven't gotten to run a show or been involved in that capacity in a long time, and I really do miss it. And when we did Alias, we were told, we did a couple of seasons, and it never was quite the hit that ABC wanted it to be, granted, but we had this kind of serialized storytelling idea that we would end episodes with this preposterous cliffhanger and start the episode kind of catching up to it, and we'd end the episode with a preposterous cliffhanger. We just kind of keep going. And at the end of the second season, having not been lucky enough to work with Stephen or Bochco or David Kelley, I'd never learned the quit lesson. And I wish I had, because they probably would have said, there's the door. But the truth is, I didn't stand up for it, and they said, you can't do serialized storytelling anymore. And we had to stop. And I think the show went in a direction it shouldn't have as a result, and it was my fault for not standing up for it. When Damon Lindelof and I created Lost, we had a lot of ideas, but the truth is, exactly where the show was going to go was a terrifying unknown. We had a lot of thoughts, but who knew? It was Damon and Carlton Cuse who ran that show, and working on Lost was an extraordinary thing. It was not dissimilar where we did this 2-hour pilot, and the network didn't really believe in it. We got a call from someone at the network who said, there's no business in doing this show as a show, so please, we were shooting the pilot, please film a scene to end it so we could air it as a movie. To which I said, tell me what you want me to shoot, and I'll shoot it, knowing there wasn't an answer, because it was like, what is it? Someone wakes up, I don't know. Hey, that's genius. Anyway, and so that show just, then that show worked and found an audience very quickly, and suddenly it was serialized storytelling. And we were suddenly allowed to do serialized storytelling. And Damon and Carlton, who did, I think, an extraordinary job, did one more thing, which is they declared to the network a few years in, this show's going to end after 6 seasons, which is not an easy thing for a network to say okay to. They may have done we're going to walk if you don't let us do that, and ABC, to their credit, did.
Speaking about that kind of thing, I wanted to ask Ryan about, you've brought back anthology series, limited series. They used to be called mini-series, but now there's this whole incredible new crop of limited series. When did that idea come along? Did people tell you you can't make TV like that anymore?
No, I mean, it happened to me because it was everything that I do is something that I'm interested in at that moment. And what was happening for me at that time was, I think we were doing Glee, which was 22 episodes a year, which was really hard and is really long, and anybody who does that hourly grind knows that. It's hard on the actors, it's difficult. And social media had started to explode. And I myself, I just had less attention span. And I had less time for commitment. And when I was younger, I couldn't wait to watch 30 episodes of Dynasty a year. But suddenly I didn't have that time anymore, and I thought, well, what would be good for me? I could commit to 10 hours of something that I loved. So Dana and Gary and Peter and John, I went in and Brad and I pitched them, and I pitched them the idea of a horror show, and then I said, and then at the end, everybody dies, and you rebuild the sets for season 2 and you reboot it with a new idea, which was sort of something that I loved when I was a kid. I loved miniseries. I loved the Thornbirds. I loved Roots. I remember I liked they were able to attract a certain level of cast and talent. And so it really just came from my childhood, as always, things that I loved growing up and what I was suddenly interested in and what were my own viewing habits. And, it was a real risk, and it was a very expensive risk because but what it did do is miniseries had stopped being made in town and anthological shows because there was no way to monetize them. There was no way to sell them. You couldn't sell them overseas. You couldn't sell them to streaming places. So what it did is it put a label of a show on it, and you could sell it, and suddenly it made financial sense. But looking back, it was a really big risk that we all took. And but that's what I'd like to do. That's what makes me excited, something that's scary, I guess.
And congratulations, you just announced yesterday you have another show, Pose, and I think Evan and James are in the audience here. So for all of you, when you're working on more than one thing at a time, how do you figure out a way to do everything well?
You eat fast.
Because you've all had multiple projects going at the same time. I mean, how do you do it? You mentor people that you trust that can step into roles, or?
Well, I mean, for me, yes. I mean, what happened in my career was somebody said yes to me and I couldn't believe it. And then the next time I said, I want to do this, they said yes. So I've always leaned into the yes because I'm aware that they're rare, and I lean into that idea because I know how hard it is to get something going. But for me, you know, I do have really strong number twos, and what I've tried to do in my company is create a community of like-minded people that believe in the same things and want to tell the same stories, and have executives that are aligned to that idea. And also, you know, I'm 50, and what I'm interested in doing is yeah, I know, it doesn't sound that great compared to Norman. The point being is, I feel like Norman does, as we've discussed, like, I feel a responsibility to say, like, who's the next young voice? Who's the next person who is different than the mainstream? So I try and bring those people up, and I try and work with them on those shows, and train them and talk to them, and as I did with Norman when I first started out. He was one of the very first people that reached out to me and said, you know, keep being unusual, keep being different. That's how you change the world, and it meant the world to me. And this was 1998, and so I've only tried.
He just
to do
reached
Norman.
out to you, just
Yeah,
randomly?
as he has all of us, I believe. I mean, yeah, Norman was one of the first people in my life and my career who said, you're kind of weird, and that's great. You know, and I never forgot it. And Norman was, as I told him, was my formative childhood memory. And I think is actually, along with Barbra Streisand, the reason I'm in the entertainment industry. But I was 5 years old, and my parents used to let me watch All in the Family. And one day my father was on a business trip, and my mother said, okay, you can watch it. And it was the episode where Edith fends off a rapist. And I burst into tears, and I ran out of the room. And then my mother said, okay, that's enough. And I said, no, I want to know how it ends. And I think that it ignited in me, like, oh, storytelling is fun. And so that was the beginning of me being interested in that, and it was because of Norman. So to have Norman be my beginning, and then one of the first people who called me when I tried to say, you know, good on you, I cannot tell you how, and I've told him this, how important that was to me as a person. Wow. It was very moving and meant something to me.
You talk about having a community. Shonda has a land, so you know, Shonda Land is huge. I think at one point there's like 80 hours of television a year coming out of Shonda Land. So when we talk about multitasking, and you know, how do you do it? And both of you, as women in television, do you feel an additional responsibility to keep creating and employing women and showing that women can be bosses?
You know, what's interesting is, in the beginning, I definitely felt like it was a ton of me just trying to juggle and do as much as I can, mainly because I'm a girl from the Midwest and I clip coupons. And so I got one job, and I was like, oh my God, I had a job, and it's going to go away any minute. So when they thought you can have a second show, I thought I better get another job. So it was great. It was all about keeping jobs and not getting fired. And then when it sort of became clear that these shows weren't going anywhere, and that maybe I had a career, which was, I think, like season 8 of Grey's, I thought, like, okay, I'm good. I'm serious. Then it really was about, okay, how do I build this, and how do I make it so that other people around me get to have opportunities as well? And, you know, we have this great group of writers, and nobody ever left, and I never wanted anybody to leave. And we tried to sort of make it so that other people could have shows, and other people could grow and run rooms. And I really wanted to make it so that I could have all this happening, but not be the person who was, you know, doing any of the work, or all of the work at least. And people are so talented. You know, people come in and they have so much talent, and they're so interesting, and they have so many stories to tell. And I don't know why it has to be that it's all me. You know, that's the thing that I think is probably the mistake of naming it Shondaland, is people actually think it's all me, and it has nothing to do with that. It's really just about finding great creative voices and nurturing them. And I don't think that it's a responsibility to hire women or find people of color and give them opportunities. That's just Tuesday. Like, it's not a thing that I have to make an effort to do. There are plenty of talented voices out there. People hire people who they respond to them, and they respond to their talent, and people come in and they're interesting to you. Women gravitate towards our company. People of color gravitate towards our company. A lot of interesting people gravitate towards our company. It's not a special effort that we make. It's just the world that we exist in.
Jill?
I think I feel, I grew up in a neighborhood in Chicago in the middle of the civil rights movement, and really, I think, fell in love with movements in the same moment I fell in love with TV. We were watching television, but we were also witnessing our parents fight for integration and for ERA, and I just loved being part of a movement, licking the envelopes and the stamps and buttons and really, just believing that through politics and through civil rights, the world would change. And I think, I really believed the world was going to change whenever that was, in 1976, when I remember the Black Panthers came and marched in our neighborhood. And, we lived in a neighborhood in Chicago that was integrated, and we were living it. We were living the revolution and thought that it was the beginning of the change. I grew up thinking it was the beginning of the changing of the world. And then, I don't know, 80s and fur coats and cocaine, what happened? Like, the 70s ended and suddenly people stopped caring, and we went about our business in the 80s and 90s, and then when I became in this position where I could actually make television, old enough to make television, I started to realize that if I wasn't part of a movement, it didn't matter to me, and I had to make the TV a movement, and I had to make going to work a movement. And so obviously that was easy with Transparent. For 10 years I had been writing shows about unlikable women, but it took a man playing one for me to be able to actually get work. But luckily, my parent came out as trans, and I had a show that I immediately, probably within moments of that phone call, was like, okay, this is my time. I look on the stage. JJ and I developed a show together called Boundaries, which is essentially Transparent. It had a lot of the same things in it. Transparent should be called Boundaries, I think. And that was however many years ago. It was an amazing idea. It was like, the pitch was, you've seen the procedural from the point of view of the judge, the lawyer, and the jury, and the criminal, but you've never seen it from the point of view of the mobile notary. It was fantastic.
Can you believe it didn't work?
It was so funny. It was a comedy from the point of view of a mobile notary.
I still love it.
I love it too.
I do.
We're going to make that show. But so yeah, I'm a little bit more like, I have to get women and people of color and queer people into these jobs. I'm sort of like, the boat, the gates of the boat are open. Come on, get on, get on. And so I love teaching people what I've learned about story and helping kind of democratize the process of protagonism. I believe that protagonism is privilege, and art is the propaganda for the self. So as women start to tell their own stories, it changes the world for other women. So I'm like a zealot about women, people of color, and queer people not only being able to, play characters, but you start writing, and I go through the sort of process of like, okay, we're going to make sure we have a trans woman. We're going to make sure we have a trans woman of color. Oh, where are the people of color on the writing staff? Oh, I need to give show. I need to find, people of color who can create shows. You start realizing that every effort to just fill a slot becomes more evidence that there just aren't enough creators making work from a point of view other than a straight white male. And I go crazy thinking, the Hamilton thing, like I'm running out of time. I have to work as hard as I can, as quickly as I can before we run out of time. Wow.
We should get back to that show idea, you two.
I know.
We should.
It's a little silly.
So David, I'm curious about the fact that you've been known for quality television for decades, and lately you've been also sort of dabbling in, you were adapting other people's work, like Leanne Moriarty's Big Little Lies, which, congratulations, is an incredible success. And getting a man to write those voices of all those women was great. I don't know how you did it. and also Stephen King's Mr. Mercedes, adapting that. And then in the middle of all of that, coming up with this great little show, Goliath, with Billy Bob Thornton, who won the Golden Globe last year, which was on streaming. So how do you make your decisions these days about, you know, it doesn't seem like you're as interested in the old days of having the brand of the David Kelley show that we would sort of know what we were going to get.
No. And truthfully, I was never interested in the brand. It was never my goal to build a big company, which I had for a while in Manhattan Beach. I really just wanted to write, and I loved writing, and came up with an idea for a show, and then there was another show that felt viable to me, and then I had Ally McBeal in the practice, and then a third one. Well, now you needed stage space and a whole company so you can cross-pollinate your departments and make it run efficiently. And suddenly I had a company, and it was a great company, many good people, but you get to a point where you're feeding the beast. And I never wanted to get to that time where I have to create another show, but for these people will lose their jobs. And it was getting to that point where I started to create shows, none of which were featured or saluted by the foreign press for good reason. And I wanted to just get back to writing. So I disbanded that company and went back to the one thing at a time, or sometimes two things at a time. But apropos of what Ryan said, I'm older by 10 plus years than Ryan. Doing 22 was too much of a bear. Doing 8 or 10, that seemed doable. I also, and what Jill said, running out of time, I'm running out of it faster than you are, so I want to work on different things. If you give birth to a franchise that's got to run, if not in perpetuity, 5 or 6 years to make its model at 22 episodes a year, you're not going to have time for a whole lot of diverse storytelling. So it became very organic for me to look for limited projects, and I started to do that. It was presented with Big Little Lies by Lan Moriarty, which was a fantastic book, and I didn't think that I would love the adaptation process because the true intoxication, for me, had always been hatching the idea, breaking the story. The writing of it is more of the labor, but when you come up with a great idea or break a story, that's what fuels you. So here I was given this beast where it was pre-broken, and I wasn't sure how much I would enjoy that process, but it turns out it really was a blueprint for mining all these interesting characters, and there was so much fertility in the different directions of different characters that I could be as creative as I wanted to be, and I just really enjoyed it. So I think it's a good gig, this adaptation thing. I'm a fan.
There's another way of handling the running out of time situation. You find yourself a young associate. There's a Brent Miller in my life, and he's here this evening. A young guy who's got lots of time. And that's why there's a One Day at a Time and a Rita Moreno in the audience, who was a show I've never done anything I'm prouder of than the show she and it's a Latino version of a show we did a long time ago. And I'm doing a show sold to NBC as a result of Brent being in my life, that I've wanted to do for 40-some years. And that's a show about aging. And the show is called Guess Who Died? and we're doing it for NBC. And look for it.
JJ, also congratulations for Westworld.
Oh, thank you.
I know you work closely with Jonathan and Lisa. Can you talk about that collaboration? And I mean, that was an incredibly ambitious show that took a long time to come to fruition. What was that like?
What happened was I was meeting with Jonah Nolan about a movie idea, and then he said, I have this idea for a TV show. And we started talking about that, and it became Person of Interest, which ran on CBS. And during that time, I had always loved Westworld since I was a kid. It scared the hell out of me. And so I met with Michael Crichton 20 years ago about doing another version or adapting it somehow, and it never went anywhere. And then I kept thinking about it, and then I met with Jerry Weintraub, who had the rights about 10 years ago, and it didn't go anywhere. And then I had this thought about what if we did it for TV? What if it was from the point of view of the robots? And had a sort of concept that I thought could be fun, and thought HBO would be my favorite place in the world for this, because it felt like it needed to be crazy, edgy, and daring, and sort of an A treatment of what was sort of a B pulp idea, which is what I liked about the movie when I was a kid. And I sold the show to HBO, just pitched them on the idea, and then realized I didn't have time to do it. I was supposed to do a movie, didn't know who was going to run it. It was just a concept. And Kathy Ling, who was running TV at Bad Robot at the time, said, what about Jonah? I said, he's doing Person of Interest. But it was clear that wasn't going to go on forever. So I called Jonah and pitched him this idea. He said, what about doing it with Lisa, who is genius, his wife, and an amazing writer we've been wanting to work with for a long time. Anyway, they are so brilliant. And they're like friends with Elon Musk, for example. And so they have these kind of conversations about, are we living in a simulation? Which you know we are, and all sorts of things. And so they brought sort of an intellectual sort of bent to this thing that I could only have dreamt of. They are far better at what they do than I am. And so it was an amazing thing to have them come on and get into this bizarre, twisted, messed up, not dystopian, but like, sort of troubling view of technology and where it may go, and in this kind of, Frankensteinian way, the way the movie did, they made it relevant in very much in their minds, which I knew, was going to be a bit of a bear to get going. And HBO was incredibly patient, and there was a period of time when we stopped production in the beginning to figure out some stuff, but they actually were so cool, the network, and the show ended up being something that I'm incredibly proud to be associated with, and must give all the credit to Jonah and Lisa, who did an amazing job.
A lot of you are involved with streaming. If not right now, you're working on things where you will be. Ryan, I know you've got a Netflix thing, and Shonda, and Jill's on Amazon, Goliath. And also Norman has Netflix, so you're into streaming now. Can you all talk a little bit about, this is the big conversation everyone's having now. Where is TV going? Is this disruption good for television? Do things get lost now in the landscape? You're all sort of involved in it. What do you think about where everything's headed?
What do you think, Ryan?
I think that, I think creatively it's very exciting, and I feel like it gives the showrunners, writers, a lot of options. And I think that the way of the future is sort of upon us now, where you curate how you want to watch and when you want to watch it. And I think even more traditional networks and cable outlets will be doing their own version of that.
Tell them you're busy.
I have 6 kids, and I told them I would never turn off my phone. Let's see if this is the kid. Hello? Wait a minute.
See you tomorrow.
Wait, sweetheart. You're talking to several hundred people here. Tell them. She was on stage this evening.
Oh.
Spoke at some event and was being honored. Am I right?
Yes.
This is Maggie Lear.
Hi, Maggie.
I love you too, sweetheart. Bye.
Thank you so much.
I love it. Sorry.
It's okay. We were talking about streaming and the future of television.
Disruption. Yeah, I would love
Disruption.
to use this moment to talk about a show that I felt lucky enough to create at Amazon called I Love Dick.
And Catherine Hahn's here in the audience
here.
too.
That show never would have been made ever before anybody ever. I think like being, having Amazon say you made transparent, what do you want to make next? And I said a show called I Love Dick. And the fact that you can find your show and that audiences can find their show. And the show doesn't need, when you think about the fact that people did need to all show up at 8 o'clock on a Friday, and now a show like I Love Dick or Transparent is sitting in a place on a cloud in perpetuity and can be seen in hundreds of countries, I think much more specific art can be monetized now because it can find its audience so much more quickly. So I Love Dick is a show about the female gaze. It's about female desire. It's about wanting to have your voice. It's about toppling the patriarchy. And it was written by a woman named Chris Kraus, who, when she first wrote that book, people didn't want to publish it. They thought it was she was telling the story of a powerful man in her life, and he tried to sue her to stop her from telling her story. In this moment right now with what's going on with women's stories, I think the thing I was struck with the most over the weekend was not only have men told most of the stories, but they've invested money in getting women not to tell their stories. The settlements, the millions and millions, when I thought about that $36 million settlement that somebody got for shutting up, women are getting paid to shut up, and I want that money to make movies. And and so streaming made it possible that a show like I Love Dick, which is about women finding their voices, actually got made and is there to be found. And hopefully now, you never know, we might be able to get a second season on. So we're super excited.
What about you, Shonda? A new land?
I'm really excited about the future of Netflix. There's nothing wrong with having spent so many years telling network television. It's just that the constraints of network television tell you what kinds of stories you can tell, period. I mean, that's just the way it is. There's a certain kind of audience you can talk to. There's a number of kinds of people you can talk to. There's a time zone and time period you have to do things in. And I love the concept that, there is a brand that people assume that I am and the kinds of stories that I can tell, and they have nothing to do with me as a writer. But simply have to do with the fact that we're on ABC and we're on television, on network television. And I'm excited to tell other stories. I'm excited to tell stories in different ways. I'm excited to be able to just do things in a different way. It's just time. And I don't think that it's about disrupting network television. I don't think we're saying that storytelling is changed. I think that good stories are good stories and people find them wherever they are.
And Ryan, what about you?
It's interesting. I mean, I think that I sort of see how all of the players in the game at this point are valid and interesting to me. I think there's something that I love about a show that came on that I was waiting for 2 years to come on, Mindhunters, and I devoured it in 3 days, and I loved that experience in my life. I also created or helped create something on FX, The People versus O.J. Simpson, and one of the funny, great things about that show was we created those episodes in a very specific way to almost be talking points each week and to launch cultural conversations. So there was something very validating to me about releasing one a week, and people talked about it and wrote articles about it, and it launched conversations, and that was also really cool. So I sort of feel that storytelling is storytelling, and it just depends on how you want to consume the stories you're watching, and I do both in my life. I watch Housewives every night in some capacity, and it's just a different mechanism. I sort of feel the more options you have as a person ever is a good thing, and I think television viewing has become that.
Norman, what do you think of the idea going back to your early TV days that storytelling is storytelling? You've seen the medium change tremendously. Do you feel that it's just still all about the story? It doesn't matter about the medium?
The thing that's very different about Netflix in terms of the creating episode by episode, you can't be topical. You can't be right on top of a story because you make 13. We have finished the second season of One Day at a Time some weeks ago. It won't be on until January. So it was impossible to be topical. I miss that. But dealing with the streamer is delicious. It's there's also something that occurs to me. No syndication. I mean, you do not it's a different business model. It's difficult to say, but you simply don't make as much because you can't syndicate the show it's on, and it's Jill said it's there forever, and at any time, anywhere in the world.
So, what are you all watching these days on TV? Because that's a conversation everyone's always having now. What are you watching?
Too much of the news.
I love my Kardashians. I can't get enough Kardashians. There are going to be 3 babies born in one season. There's craziness going on. There's craziness.
You hurt my heart. You hurt my heart deep
You watch
inside.
Kardashians too?
No, you hurt my heart deep inside.
Well, if I watch regular TV, I'm trying to fix the writing. I'm trying to fix the scenes. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, where's the beat change? I work when I watch regular TV. So I have to, I watch Housewives. I'll come over and we can watch Housewives together. I would love that.
I would love that.
I love Housewives
Let's do
and
it.
Kardashians. That's about it.
The two things that I watched in the past year that I loved the most was I loved Mindhunter, the Fincher show. And I was obsessed with David's show, Big Little Lies. It was something to look forward to. I loved that cast of women, and I was thrilled that they got to tell that story in the way that they told it. Those are the two things that I've had the biggest visceral reaction to, I guess, in this year for me.
You're not watching any TV, you three? David?
Oh, I saw Feud. We talked last time because we were going back and forth who our most valuable players were. Because in Feud, 1 week I'd be all for Joan Crawford. The next week, no, Betty Davis is it. But also, like Nora, I watched too much of the news, and I've recently stopped just because there are reruns and there are reruns. And it's just too much of the same old every single night. So I've cut back on that at least.
What about you?
I love Insecure. And my wife and I just started watching The Wire because we never properly watched it from the beginning, which I got to tell you is like opening another door in our reality into just such an, I mean, I know why it's an obsession for everyone who saw it when it first aired a long time ago. But for us, it's just like reading an amazing novel.
When you people say when you make TV that you have a different relationship with the audience because you're invited into their living room versus going to a Cineplex to watch a film. Do you all have those interactions and feel that sense that you really connect with people? And can you think of some of the times where you had one of those conversations where you realize that you are making a difference in people's lives?
I remember when, for me, one of the most impactful moments I ever had was when we did Glee the first season, and we had a character named Artie who was in a wheelchair, and we made him a romantic, sexualized person. And that was always very important to me to do, and then suddenly that show became something else, and we were doing a tour in an arena. And the opening night of it, there was a group of 5 or 6 children in wheelchairs who drove on a special piece of equipment, I think 3 states over, to be there because for the first time ever in their lives they had seen someone who looked like them and acted like them on television. And that to me was really impactful and showed me the power of the medium. And I remember that from when I was a kid. I mean, I had Norman shows and that's kind of it. There weren't really a lot of gay characters on the shows, but I never saw myself on television. I had Charles Nelson Riley and Paul Lynde, and they were fabulous. But I'm like, where am I? So I related to Edith. I related to Valerie Bertinelli. I related to that. And so since that moment, I've always really been aware that the more specific you can be with a character, you think it's not you or a throwaway, but it literally can change somebody's life and open them up to the possibility that they matter. That's what I learned with that show.
I'm reminded that, of a moment in an evening that I could never forget. It was a couple of years ago, and it was in town at some theater. And the evening was, what do a 92-year-old, 3 years ago, what do a 92-year-old Jew and the world of hip-hop have in common? And I was on, speaking of common, he was on the stage, as was Russell Simmons. Everybody was black except me. And that was the conversation. And Russell Simmons, I will never forget, said he was watching the Jeffersons, and George Jefferson was signing a check. And he, at 9 or 10 or however old he was, had never known that a black man could write a check.
Wow.
And when he said that, and the way he said it was such an I could never forget that moment, that it had mattered so much in his life that he learned his race could write a check. Wow. So
you know, it can't be overstated how much of an icon this man is. Yeah. We are all. You've heard everybody telling bits and pieces relating to Norm. We're all sitting up here in large part because of him. Mm-hmm. Not because we necessarily wanted to be him, but he influenced us. When I was growing up, it never occurred to me to get into entertainment or television. It just wasn't a vocation that was on the menu. Nor was television considered really an appropriate form of study. And in fact, I was telling you this story. My parents would make me go up and do my homework, and I was a kid who kind of did most of my homework. We were not allowed to watch TV. And one time I came down and All in the Family was on, and it was like, wow, this show was willing to tackle topical and controversial subject matter. It was willing to take huge risks combating prejudice. It was going to make you laugh, but on its best episodes also move you to feel. And you watch these episodes and you went, that is some stuff. And I remember for me, I was 15 or 16, I think you were 5. It occasioned me to realize that the medium at its best could be very, very noble. And when you talk about the viewers, the question was originally, do we relate to the viewers? And in an arrogant way, I think I do. The unseen character on all the shows that we work on, we like to think is the viewer because we want to pretend that they're talking about the show afterwards and they're debating the pros and cons. But when I was, we did that with All in the Family. I remember going to school and kids talking, did you see that last night? and debating. And some of the debates weren't pretty because the subject matter could be ugly. But the impact that he has had on this business and all of us, it just, as I said, it can't be overstated.
Wow. Well said. Go ahead, JJ.
I was going to say one thing, which is just one more Norman thing, because I think that if we all had our druthers, all we'd be talking about up here is Norman, which is that as a kid, I watched every show that he did, and there's the rhythm, the tone of the writing, the characters. There was something that was unifying these disparate worlds, in some cases connected, but it was just this unbelievably powerful thing. A few years ago, I got to read Guess Who Died. It is one of the most unbelievable experiences. It's Norman Lear. Like, it is his writing. It is that rhythm. It is that specificity. It is that kind of comedy. It is so specific. It was reading one of my favorite authors. Again, I cannot wait to see the show on the air.
Wow, there you go.
Norman for president.
I feel like I need to let you know she was waving her sign over there.
She's trying to tell me to shut up, I think. Yeah. Okay, so now we get a chance to turn some lights on out here and get some questions from some other people here in the audience. Before I open it up, though, do any of you have any questions for each other? This is your chance.
What are we doing here?
I can't top that.
Well, actually, I mean, it took me 95 years, some hours, some months, some days, some weeks, just to get here. Now I'm seeing faces, just to look at these faces. And it took me another few seconds to say that. So this is a big moment.
Okay, in the back. Oh.
Hey guys, I guess a while back there was a movie called TV Movie with David Duchovny, and it was a really fascinating concept. He played a showrunner, and he had written for a specific actor. And when he went to do a test with the studio, they were like, no, we don't like that actor. You have to cast this other person. And it was this whole kind of dichotomy for him. It's like, what do? I wrote it for this person, and now they're forcing me to do it for somebody else. So having created this myriad of amazing shows, what actor have you fought for? What actor has this network told you, we don't want this person, but you knew I wrote it for this person, this needs to be cast?
Well, I can start because I've had several. The first with Kathy Baker for Picket Fences, but that was a very short fight. But of course, everybody wants younger at the time in networks. The bigger one was Mandy Patinkin in Chicago Hope. I got the note from CBS, too Jewish. And then on Boston Legal, I was told that no one would ever welcome James Spader into their living room. Terrific, fine actor. They'll go to watch him in the movies, but they will never let him in their own home. And those were specifically, I mean, especially for James, it was written for him. And Kathy was pretty much written for her too. Mandy's role, as soon as he became available, because he's brilliant, and the world has tumbled to that reality since that he can do almost anything. But you will have to fight for actors, and that still goes on today. I mean, networks, if they're going to put up $10 million or $20 million or more, they want to say, and sometimes they're not going to see eye to eye with us.
I never had the problem. I don't remember having that problem.
I've had it a lot in my career, but it's never been a problem. I feel like what my job is to do is to say, I see something, and then to explain what I see. And most of the time that's a young person that I see something in that I'm excited by, and I've had it over and over and over again. It's never a no, it's a conversation of me having to do my job and explain to the people who are putting up the money what I see. I mean, I had it with So many times. I had it with Sarah Paulson from Marcia Clark. The second I read it, I was like, I want Sarah to do that, and I won't do it without her. And it was a conversation, and everybody listened to me and said, okay. I had it with Leah Michelle on Glee. We
have some Glee cast here. I'm so happy to.
I had it with Matt Bomer on The Normal Heart. I have had it recently with Darren Criss on the assassination of Gianni Versace. Just people that I've worked with or young people that I love, and I've had it with Evan Peters. I had it this year on American Horror Story, where I just see something in them and I say, I really want to challenge you. Are you up for it? And every artist says, I am. And I say, okay, let's go. That to me is the best part of my life and my job. And it's the thing I love the most.
Anybody? I have a very different approach to casting in the sense that I always think that it's half of who the actor is and half of what the writing is. Like the character's kind of flat until they're inflated by whoever's acting in the role. So to me, the role sort of gets more written as I discover who the actor is. So I never sort of write for anybody. I think I've written for somebody once, and I think that was Scott Foley. And they said no. And then, but then I wrote a different part for Scott Foley, and then they said yes, so it was fine. But it was that sort of, the more you have an actor in the part, I sort of look for something in somebody, and then it sort of works. I don't know what it is, but it's not about me saying, I wrote this for this person. So it's always been a really great collaboration.
I totally love that. I agree with that. Like sometimes you don't even know until you see an audition where you're like, oh, there you are, you, and then you hire them and then you write to their strength. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
That is the great miracle of our business. Archie Bunker. Yes, I wrote Archie Bunker. And I loved the character, but I had no idea that he would be Carroll O'Connor. Carroll O'Connor, I had auditioned 30 or some guys. I didn't think anybody worked. He came in and read half a page. And I knew, and it was nothing I had in mind. I mean, I think that is such a miracle when the actor puts on your words and suddenly the role is alive.
Yeah.
JJ, when you cast Kerry Russell and Jennifer Garner, who are doing pretty well since you gave them their big breaks, did you know immediately they were the stars of your two first shows?
When Matt Reeves and I created Felicity, this was a kind of wallflower, no boyfriend, loner, straight A student, you know. And Kerry Russell walked in, and it was the dumbest thing ever. It was like that. She could not have been less what we had imagined. She's this beautiful, you know, effervescent. She's like an angel, and then she read and was so funny, and was just so good. She was just so, you know. So sometimes you think you know better, and then you realize you're an idiot. And then with Jen, I'd worked with her on Felicity, and when I wrote Alias, I wrote it with her in mind, and Katie, my wife, was always like, you gotta do something with Jen. And so I wrote this part and knew I wanted her to be Sydney Bristow, and the network didn't want to cast her and felt that they were like, you know, we don't think she's hot enough. Oh. And I was like, I'm just telling you she is. And so they relented, and we got to do it with her, but, and she's one of the greatest people in the world. But that was, for both of them, it was, working with them was such a joy, and they both just wore the part. And in one case, I knew it 100%. In the other case, I thought I didn't, and then realized I did. So.
Okay, another question over in the corner there.
Following up on what Ryan and Norman have said, I was struck by what Ryan said about not seeing himself as a kid on television. So if any one of you can talk about how the TV landscape has changed in terms of diversity, especially when you're maybe growing up or when you first entered the business.
Well, now I think it is part of business. I think it's good business. I think it's good business to give as many different voices and people experiences, and it just brings in audiences. Everybody supports that and wants that, and I think that particularly in the past 5 years, if you don't do that, something is wrong with you.
not normal.
It's not normal, and you're not a good artist, and you're not a good business person. And I think that executives support that, and they want that. Networks support that, and they want that. That is completely new, though. That was not around in the late '90s when I started, and I think that's an amazing, important change in the past 20 years.
In the back corner there, yep, with your hand up.
Hello, my name is Shawnee Moore Weatherby. I am a lawyer at NBC, and I also write TV drama. And one of the common themes throughout this fantastic conversation has been your love for writing and how you identify as a writer. And so I was wondering, what's the first thing you wrote that you were proud of, and why?
Norman.
Good morning. Thank you for being here, and I am very happy to be a bar mitzvah.
I guess the most important thing was the first thing, because it was picking up the pen and walking a plank. I was a lawyer in Boston, and I liked being a lawyer, but something, I'd go to work every day in my suit, and I'd sit at my desk, and whatever it wasn't it. And I started writing a screenplay, and I didn't know anybody out here. I didn't know if I'd have anybody to pitch it to or sell it to, but I became aware of just how how it's transforming the power of picking up a pen and writing was. And that was the beginning of my escape. We used to work, because every young litigator has to work till like 8 or 9 at night. And I used to walk home a part of Boston where the theater would be getting out at intermission, and people would be out smoking cigarettes, and then they'd let people back in. And I'd be walking home, and I'd walk in and see the second half of whatever show was playing with the smokers. And I saw the second act of anything that ran through Boston. And one day I was sitting at and I'd be exhausted when I left the office, and I'd feel exhilarated when I got home at 11 at night. I said, what's going on here? And one day at my office, I put down the pen and just took a walk and walked through the combat zone in Boston where all the theaters were. And the Colonial Theater, the door was open, it was midday, and I thought, this is an omen. And I walked in, the theater was empty, nobody in it, and I just went in the middle and I sat down and I said, this place is going to speak to me. It's going to speak to me, and it's going to fuel my screenplay, and it's going to change my life. And sure enough, this woman came out, very adorable woman, couldn't have been more than 5 feet high, and she came down and she said, excuse me, I think she was worried or something. Can I help you? And I said, no, I just came in here to sit and be one with the room. And she said, may I ask why? So I told her the whole story. I've seen the second act of everything, and I've come here and I've sit in this room and I'm thinking maybe it's going to talk to me. And she looked at me for the longest time, and then she said, get the F out of here. If you want to figure out your life, go do it out on here, but this is a place of business. And she groomed me out. And I remember thinking when I left that theater, no one's going to come get me on a magic carpet and transport me to Los Angeles and say, here, write for us. You're going to have to write your own ticket, and people aren't necessarily going to cheer for you and support you on the way up. You're just going to have to do it. So it was that first script. It was a screenplay called From the Hip. It was about law. It was optioned and made into maybe the worst movie I have ever seen. What's that? Judd Nelson, yeah. I saw the screening and wanted my name taken off of my agent. He said, you cannot do that. You cannot do that. It's produced. And that's what you want to be, produced. But that screenplay did find its way to Stephen Bochco, and he read it and said, okay, here is a lawyer who also writes. And he invited me out, and then I stayed. But that first script, as bad as that movie turned out to be, was probably my game-changing.
But that was a great story with the least expected punchline I've ever heard.
I was having a bad day at LA Law, so bad that my assistant came in and said, there's a masseuse right here on the lot. Let me call her over, and she'll get all the knots out of your head and everything else. And she wasn't in, but some other guy, a replacement, was in. And he came in and said, yeah, you're really all knotted up and everything. And I said, yeah, well, it's been a tough week. Why? Yeah, I can see that. Television, it must be hard to go to work on television, because television, it's not about anything, and it's kind of grunt work, and you probably don't feel good about yourself. And you could tell he was doing, this is not helping my massage. But he said, you know, movies can be worse. I saw a movie last week with Judd Nelson.
That's fantastic. Is that true? That's fantastic.
Wow.
That's fantastic.
Do the rest of you want to share your first piece of writing and that made you proud?
I think it's dangerous to trust the pride you have in your own work. I do. I mean, there are things I remember being proud of that now I'm, you know, I'd rather not mention, you know. So, I don't know, it's tricky.
I guess I have a memory of working on 6 Feet Under. Before that, I'd worked on a lot of sitcoms and had a good time, but was trying to fulfill whatever it was that I felt the showrunner wanted. And I ended up writing a short story, and Alan Ball read it and hired me on 6 Feet Under. And I was still really, you know, I still didn't have a lot of confidence. But when I forever remember writing my first draft of my first episode, which was in the second season. I think it was like episode 208. And I turned in my first draft to Alan, and then a couple hours later that night, he wrote me an email that said, I fucking love it. And that was it. But I was like, I think that felt like a moment for me where I realized I could do it. You know, I realized I could do it. I don't know. I think in some ways, you know, I was battling before that with just one, you know, at the computer, is this good? Is this good? And then somebody like him telling me it was good, it transformed me into somebody who could actually sort of keep going and keep typing and believing that I could do it, you know? So it's not really necessarily that script for me that stands out, but it's that moment in my life where I got an email from a boss whose writing I totally respected, telling me he fucking loved it. It was like, that felt like the beginning of something.
Anybody else? Shonda, Ryan, did you want to throw anything in, or we'll move on?
My story just makes me sound like an ass because I'm the youngest of 6, and my parents are awesome, and I basically am. I used to say I'm the Blue Ivy, but that's not fair to Blue Ivy. I'm the Blue Ivy of my family, and that everything I do is they just applaud. And so from the time I was very small, I just thought I was delightful as a writer. So it doesn't translate well ever.
Amazing.
That's very fun.
I guess for me, it was probably the pilot script of Nip Tuck, which happened sort of 6 years into my career, and I think that was the moment because it was sort of the first time I allowed myself to be me and to follow something that I was interested in and actually was, as opposed to becoming something that somebody else wanted. Like when I started off, romantic comedies were big, so everybody kept saying, well, write romantic comedies, and I didn't like romantic comedies, but I tried. But I would say that because, and the lesson I learned from that was, oh, well, there was a reason you weren't really being very successful because you weren't being authentic. You weren't being true. And I always tell young people, like, don't listen to what everybody else tells you to do or tells you have to do to be successful. you have to do the thing that's in you that means the most to you, and everything always comes from that, I think.
Yeah. Great. Question?
One of my, I thought we were doing this.
I thought you'd already answered, but you were. Go ahead.
One of my earliest writing experiences, I was writing for Tennessee Ernie Ford, and I was writing his opening monologue, which 2.5, 3 minutes or something. And I had writer's block, which I used to call shit in the head. and I was in therapy, and I'd wind up the night before, having spent 2 days trying to write this 2.5-minute thing. And at 11 o'clock at night, I would be on the phone with my shrink, crying, carrying on. And not he, but somebody else said, and I thought this was the best advice I'd ever heard for a writer. He said, you know, you're not putting the first... Norman, you got 50 people in a theater and somebody with one small door and somebody yells fire and everybody rushes to the door and they don't all get out. He said, think of your ideas that way. He said, there's no time to let the short people out first and the blonde people and the men and the women. Think of your ideas the same way. Get them all out the door. It doesn't matter the order. You'll assort them in the order you want them when they're out of the door. I don't know whether I've told that anecdote well enough to, you know, for everybody to get it, but it was a mind-blowing opening for me. And I started to dictate from that moment on. And I'll come back next week and I'll read the first 150 pages of Come Blow Your Horn. That was a film Bud Yorkin and I were making. That was the first thing I had dictated.
Okay. Yes, over there.
Good evening. First of all, thank you thank you. I don't know if I need one. I'm British. My name is Ruth Mccartney. I'm from a little town called Liverpool. So my question, probably Ryan, you could finish all night with this. How much does, for each of you, music play a part in when you're writing, when you're thinking of characters? How involved do you get? Obviously, Ryan, it's kind of a duh question, but I am blonde. How involved do you get in the music, and at what stage? Is it the beginning? Is it halfway through? Is it at the end? Because as we know, audio is half the battle.
And JJ, you've written theme songs for quite a few of your...
I have, but only because I can say yes to them. No one else would accept my theme songs. I won an ASCAP award for my theme song or theme for Lost, which is one note.
But it was a good one.
I take that to task. I think that you know, for me, music is incredibly important, and I always write to music. So I'll find usually a few different cues that that feel like whatever the piece is, and I'll sort of have them on repeat for a long time, and I kind of get into a zone. But it helps enormously, and I work very closely with the people, Michael Giacchino, who has done a number of our TV series and some of the movies I've worked on, most of the movies, is someone who we will often work on the score and literally spot where music will go before we started shooting. We don't record in advance. There are some people like Tom Tickfor, a director and a composer as well, who actually records with an orchestra his score before he shoots. Which is obviously a luxury that I don't understand how that occurs. But congratulations to Tom Tickfor for doing that. But I think music is, like you said, it's 50, arguably 51% what makes something work for me.
Well, I feel for me it's a very important part of my job and my work. And for me, music is memory. And music is my taste and my tone and my sort of way of looking at the world, and it's another passion in my life that I can sort of take things that have meant to me at some point in my life and put them in something and open that maybe window up to somebody else. So I love doing it. I think it's a way for you to hear something and feel something, and it can make an experience of watching something even more powerful or more indelible. It's a very very powerful way to convey a thought or a feeling, and that's what we're trying to do in a very limited amount of time. But I love it. I mean, I'm doing a new show, Pose, that's set in 1987 in New York City, and I have a lot of great people that work in my company, and I said to them, come into the room and let's all listen to the songs that we love the most in 1987, and let's talk about what those memories meant to you. So that will influence, I'm sure, future scripts. It's that powerful of a thing.
And Shonda, the music that you choose for Grey's, that has made the career of many, many people who are now, they got their big break by having their song in Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah, Grey's was all about using, the show was basically based on interns who didn't know what they were doing when they went to work, or were just starting out. And so we really tried to find bands who were unknown and were just starting out. And that was part of the amazing fun of it in the beginning. And every year I sort of tried to do something a little bit different in terms of that idea and grow up the music. And that has been amazing. Alex Pitsavas, who was our music supervisor, I think she says we placed over 16,000 songs or something ridiculous like that, reading 300th episode. And in Scandal, it's really been about like Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin. And right now I'm sort of experimenting with a little bit of early 80s rap, which I'm not sure how it's going. But it's been an amazing experience because for me, music tells the story in a lot of ways. And if the music tells the story correctly, I mean, there are songs that I have been carrying around in my head for instance, on Scandal, I'd been carrying around the song Ben that Michael Jackson sang forever. And I would place it in every show. And I would go, does this work? And it didn't work. And then finally I had a moment where it worked, and it was like my whole life was made. But it was really just about finding these moments that emotionally meant something, because you're right, the songs are memory, and getting these moments in the right spots that makes them magic.
Mm-hmm. We're going to wrap up in a minute, but before we do, because the Hollywood Foreign Press have given each of you an award, I would like to know what that moment was like for you. Some of you have had it more than once, but what was your favourite Golden Globe memory? I'm assuming it was when you won.
My memory, we've been nominated for Felicity and Alias, and Jen and Carrie won. But on the year that Lost won, what I remember, frankly, was just an incredible sense of gratitude that this thing that we had put together actually made it on the air as a series at all, and that Damon and Carlton had been running this thing. I was so grateful to them for what they had done with these characters that we'd created and where it was going. And that the feeling of creating a series is this sort of wonderful and slightly terrifying thing, because you start this thing and it means if it works in success, it means just an incredible amount of work, and it's a leap of faith. And I know that on Lost, the fact that it was going where it was going with the integrity and the tone and the writing, and it was just so beautifully done. I thought what Damon and Carlton were doing, I was so grateful to them. So that day, or that night, I was really proud of what they had done, and I was thrilled to be associated with them.
David?
Yeah, it's kind of what I alluded to at the beginning. With LA Law, we were a hit, and that was a kind of icing on the cake. But with Ally McBeal and The Practice, we were still struggling to get noticed. And winning a Golden Globe is one of the better ways to accomplish that. So it wasn't just a gratifying night and an affirmation of what we were doing. It was also a bit of a lifeline too, to the extent that it was bringing other people to the table who could sample our product. It really was meaningful. So that's not lost on us.
I remember It was, I think, chicken breast with cauliflower and potatoes. It was really a lovely dinner. I don't really remember.
You've won too many awards.
What I've always loved about the Golden Globes and the Hollywood Foreign Press is, in my career at least, I've been rewarded for being outrageous and different and unique. And the first two were, Nip Tuck, which was my first show that really worked, and the Hollywood Foreign Press was the first to nominate it for anything, and it won. And I remember feeling like, oh, I'm in the showbiz game. I'm in the game somehow. And I got really drunk and talked to Joan Rivers on camera, which was a big mistake. I was so happy. I had grown up my entire life watching award shows, and it was the first time I had one, and I was like, where do you go? Like, what do you do? So it was it was new, and like David says, I mean, it really can make a difference in the success of your show. And I felt that the first season of Glee, where, we got on the air and we were doing okay, and people liked it, and then we won that Golden Globe, and then came back in the spring, and the show exploded because suddenly somebody had anointed it, and it had gotten a lot of press attention because we had won. And it was very meaningful in my career and my life to have those two moments.
Shonda?
It wasn't the year that I won and the show won. I know you guys saw the tape, and we had not eaten any food, and there's a lot of liquor on the table. That was a lot of what you saw, although I was very excited to win. It was the year before when Sandra Oh won for playing Christina Yang, mainly because I was so excited to see her win an award. She was one of my favorite actresses. I felt like she had not ever gotten enough attention. She was such a wonderful person, and she was so thrilled. And it also just felt magical, like I had written a show. We had written the show, we had made the show, and now she was up there winning an award on television. Like it felt this sort of overwhelming thing, and she was so joyful, and it was really beautiful that it was her, an actress of color, who was winning at this first award. It was just a magical moment.
Jill?
Before I say mine, I just want to say when I'm 90, I want to come to a panel and be the funniest, fastest, most interesting person. I'm 92. I mean, it's crazy. It's still the funniest one in the world. So I wrote the pilot of Transparent as this very personal thing. Like, my parent came out as trans. I didn't really even understand what they were talking about, and started imagining the world of the show as a kind of just very personal world to live in, like an escape for myself from reality, so I could live in the world of the imaginary family instead of my real family. And then the process at Amazon was so quick that, writing the pilot, getting the pilot picked up, going to series, between that moment of just that sort of being alone in my house, naming people and creating the little dolls, playing dolls with the characters in my mind that I could write lines for, to the Golden Globe stage was probably under 18 months. Maybe it was like a year and 2 months. And so there was this not only race through writing the show and creating the show, but also the revolution around transness, where it was a literal kind of attempt to remove shame from myself and my family and the people around me. I really remember when my parent came out thinking, I don't know how I'm going to tell people this, actually being embarrassed and afraid. And creating the show so that my parent could move through the world without shame and get in the elevator without somebody, misgendering them or making fun of them. And when we were sitting there at that table, we're sitting there, and the names come up, and just the tra of Transparent when we got called, just launching ourselves up, because it was about the TV show, and it was about the revolution, it was about trans people, it was about shame, and ran up there on that stage, and coming back to the after party afterwards with our statues, and walking into a room, and Jeffrey won also that night, and walking into an after party, a theater much like this that Amazon had rented for us, filled with friends and filled with trans people and filled with the queer community of Los Angeles, and walking in with those statues and people just erupting. You know, it felt like you guys, like the Golden Globes, and the recognition had allowed a group of people to be seen, and we felt like we had changed the world.
Well, on behalf of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, we'd love to thank. I wish we could sit here all night and talk to you all, but we can't. So if everybody would like to go upstairs, there's a party on the rooftop and we can keep talking about TV. So thank you, and thank you all for being here. There's a lot of casts of a lot of the shows here, and a lot of the great TV executives who've supported us and all this talent. So thanks for coming. Thank you.